In a small American town near Denver, Colorado, Ethan Miller's life revolved around the dusty little garage he owned on the edge of Main Street. He was 34, tired beyond his years, and his hands were always stained with oil and grease. Most nights he worked late just to keep the lights on, the bills paid, and the bank from taking the only thing he owned. His garage wasn't much, just 2 old service bays, a battered toolbox, and a flickering neon sign, but it was his world, and he fought every day to keep it alive despite the growing weight of debt. That particular night was colder than usual, the kind of winter chill that seeped through walls and cut into bones. Ethan had just locked up, ready to head back to his small, dimly lit apartment above the garage, when he heard the coughing, sputtering sound of an engine failing. He paused, frowning, as the echo bounced off the quiet street. A few moments later, he spotted a car rolling slowly to a stop under the faint glow of a broken street lamp. Instinct overruled his exhaustion, and he jogged toward the vehicle, wiping his hands on his oil-stained rag as he approached. Behind the wheel sat a young woman who looked more frightened than frustrated. Her long brown hair fell loosely over her shoulders, and her tired eyes reflected the glow of her dashboard lights. She couldn't have been more than 25, far too young to be stranded alone at midnight in a near-empty town. Ethan tapped gently on her window, startling her for a second before she rolled it down with trembling hands. "Engine trouble?" he asked softly, his voice calm, the kind of tone that had comforted many stranded travelers before. She nodded, biting her lip. "It just died. I don't know what happened." There was a faint quiver in her voice, one that carried not just frustration, but fear. Ethan could tell she had been through a long day already, and this was the last thing she needed. "Don't worry," he said with a small smile. "I'll take care of it." Without hesitation, he put his shoulder to the car, pushing it off the road and toward the glowing lights of his garage. She stepped out, wrapping her arms around herself against the cold, following as he guided her car inside. Inside the garage, Ethan switched on the overhead lights, flooding the space with a pale yellow glow. The familiar smell of motor oil, metal, and dust filled the air. "Olivia," she introduced herself with a soft voice, watched him curiously as he popped open her car's hood and leaned in. He moved with quiet confidence, his eyes narrowing as he traced the lines of wires and belts. Grease smeared across his cheek as he pulled out a flashlight, his worn hands steady even though exhaustion tugged at him. Olivia leaned against the wall, shivering slightly, but also strangely comforted by this stranger's determination. Ethan glanced at her once, noticing the exhaustion written on her face. She looked as though she'd been running for more than just this night, like life itself had been chasing her for miles. He didn't ask questions, not yet. He knew that sometimes silence was more comforting than conversation. Instead, he pulled a few tools from his bench, rolled up his sleeves, and got to work. Sparks of determination flickered in his eyes, the same spark that had kept him fixing cars when everyone told him to close the garage. "You're lucky you broke down." "Here," he said lightly, trying to ease the tension. "Any further down the road, and you'd have been stuck till morning." Olivia gave a small, tired smile. "I wasn't sure anyone would even stop," she admitted. "I've been stranded before. People usually just drive past." There was a sadness in her tone, a trace of loneliness that Ethan recognized all too well. He chuckled softly, shaking his head as he tightened a bolt. "Well, I guess you found the one guy who doesn't know how to look the other way." His words weren't meant to impress her. They were simple truth. Ethan wasn't the type to ignore someone in need. His life may have been falling apart, but that never stopped him from helping others. Minutes turned into nearly an hour as Ethan dug deeper into the engine. Olivia watched him closely, noting the way his brow furrowed in concentration, the way his rough hands worked with surprising gentleness over each part. The garage was quiet, except for the occasional clang of a tool or the low hum of the heater in the corner. Every so often, Ethan explained what he was doing, his voice calm, almost soothing. Alternators failing. Batteries not holding up either. You must have been running on luck to get this far. Olivia laughed faintly, her nerves slowly easing as she listened. When Ethan finally stepped back, wiping sweat and grease from his forehead, there was relief in his eyes. "It's not perfect, but it'll get you home," he said firmly. Olivia's eyes widened with gratitude. "You mean it's fixed, just like that?" Ethan gave a tired smile. "Well, it'll need some proper parts in the morning, but for tonight, you're safe. That's what matters." She stared at him, surprised at his kindness. He hadn't asked for money, hadn't complained about the hour, hadn't judged her. For once she felt seen, not as a burden, but as a human being who needed help. Ethan closed the hood and looked at her with an easy grin. "Don't worry," he said again, this time more warmly. "I'll have you back on the road tonight." The words, simple as they were, carried a weight Olivia hadn't expected. She felt her chest tighten slightly, a strange mix of relief and emotion washing over her. In that moment, she realized that sometimes strangers could show more kindness than people who had known you for years. The mechanic with grease on his hands and worry in his eyes had done more for her in one night than many had in her whole life. She tried to insist on paying him, pulling out her wallet with trembling fingers, but Ethan gently pushed it back toward her. "Keep it," he said firmly. "You need it more than I do right now. Besides, helping people, it's just what I do." Olivia's eyes watered slightly, though she quickly blinked the tears away. "Why would you do that? You don't even know me," she whispered. Ethan shrugged, his gaze dropping briefly. "Because I know what it feels like to be left on your own when you need someone. Most." His voice cracked just slightly, but he didn't explain further. Olivia wanted to ask, to press into his story, but something stopped her. Instead, she nodded, touched more deeply than she could put into words. The garage felt warmer now, safer, like a shelter from the cold world outside. She sat quietly as Ethan finished cleaning up his tools, her thoughts swirling. She had come into this garage, frightened and alone, and somehow in the presence of this poor mechanic, she felt a rare sense of comfort. She didn't know it yet, but this night the kindness of a stranger was about to change both of their lives forever. Ethan rolled up his sleeves, refusing to give in to exhaustion as he worked on Olivia's car deep into the night. The garage was cold, his breath visible in the dim light, but his focus never wavered. The damage was worse than he expected, the alternator barely hanging on, wires corroded, the battery practically dead. Any other mechanic would have told her to tow the car and come back during business hours, but Ethan couldn't bring himself to walk away. Something about Olivia's weary eyes and the loneliness she carried made him dig deeper, determined to send her home safe. From his personal stash, Ethan began pulling out old spare parts he had been saving for months. They weren't new, but he knew he could make them work. He laid them gently on the workbench, the clatter of tools filling the silence of the garage. Olivia watched, confused at first, and then concerned. "You don't have to do all this tonight," she said softly. "I can wait till tomorrow, really." Ethan shook his head firmly, tightening a bolt with practiced precision. "You're alone this late at night," he answered. "I can't take money for helping someone who needs it." Olivia blinked in surprise. She had grown up in a world where everything came with a price tag, where even the smallest kindness usually had a string attached. Yet here was this struggling mechanic, covered in grease, working past midnight without demanding anything in return. The warmth in his voice, the steadiness of his hands, it all felt strangely foreign to her. "You don't even know me," she whispered, watching him closely. Ethan smiled faintly without looking up. "Don't need to," he said. "Helping someone doesn't require a reason. His words settled deep inside her, melting something she hadn't realized had been frozen for years. As the hours stretched on, conversation began to fill the quiet space between the hum of tools. At first, it was small talk where she was headed, what brought her through Denver that night. But soon it deepened. Olivia found herself admitting more than she intended. The constant pressure of expectations, the feeling of being overlooked in her own wealthy family, the loneliness that lingered even when she was surrounded by people. She hadn't meant to share so much, but Ethan's calm presence and gentle nods drew the words out like a tide pulling at the shore. Ethan listened without judgment, his eyes occasionally flicking from the engine to her face, as though he was repairing more than just her car. When she paused, uncertain if she had said too much, he surprised her by opening up as well. "This garage, it's all I've got," he admitted quietly. "Business is barely holding on. Some nights I wonder if I'll even be here another month." There was no self-pity in his voice, just a raw honesty that struck Olivia. He spoke of late bills, missed meals, and the quiet ache of trying to keep a dream alive when the world seemed to push against him at every turn. She leaned against the wall, her eyes softening. "Why keep fighting for it if it's that hard?" she asked gently. Ethan paused, wiping sweat and grease from his brow. His expression grew thoughtful. "Because it's mine," he said finally. "It's the one thing no one handed me, no one controlled. I built this place with my own hands. It may not be much, but it's proof I didn't give up." His words lingered in the air, resonating with Olivia more than he knew. She had been handed everything in life, yet here was a man with so little, holding onto it with everything he had. The night grew colder, the wind howling faintly outside, but inside the garage it felt oddly warm. They spoke between long stretches of silence, each moment weaving a thread between them. Olivia found herself laughing quietly at Ethan's dry humor, while Ethan caught glimpses of her genuine smile, a smile that seemed far brighter than the wealthy world she hinted at. Time slipped past without either of them noticing. For once, Olivia wasn't the daughter of someone powerful, and Ethan wasn't just a struggling mechanic. They were two souls meeting in the stillness of midnight, bound by honesty and kindness. Finally, as dawn crept near, the engine gave a strong, steady roar. Ethan straightened up, his chest rising with relief as he wiped his hands on his rag. "There," he said, his voice heavy with exhaustion but laced with pride. "She's not perfect, but she'll get you home." Olivia's eyes widened as she heard the sound. After hours of uncertainty, the car was alive again, running smoother than before. She stepped closer, her gratitude spilling into her expression. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. Ethan gave her a weary but genuine smile. "You just did." She reached for her purse, pulling out a thick stack of bills, but Ethan shook his head firmly, closing her hand gently around it. "I told you I'm not taking your money," he said. "Some things aren't about payment." Olivia stared at him, stunned. She couldn't remember the last time someone had refused her money. Everywhere she went, people saw her family's wealth before they saw her, but Ethan looked right through it, treating her like any other person who needed help. Something inside her shifted, a quiet realization that kindness didn't always wear the mask of wealth or power. The garage fell silent as they stood there, just looking at each other. For Ethan, it was another night of sacrifice, another act of kindness that left him more tired and broke. For Olivia, it was something else entirely. She felt a warmth in her chest, an unexplainable pull she couldn't shake. This mechanic, who had nothing, had given more to her in a single night than she had received from people with everything. She tucked her wallet away slowly, her heart heavy but strangely light all at once. By the time Olivia slid back into her driver's seat, the sky outside was beginning to pale with the first traces of dawn. Ethan leaned against the garage door, arms crossed. Watching her start the engine, he gave her a tired but encouraging nod. "Drive safe," he said simply. She smiled at him, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. I will. For a moment, their eyes held, an unspoken promise lingering between them. She didn't know why, but she didn't want this night to be the last time she saw him. Olivia drove away quietly, her car humming steadily down the road, but her thoughts stayed behind in that small garage with the poor mechanic who had treated her with more humanity than anyone in her world of wealth ever had. She glanced in the rearview mirror, watching the faint glow of the garage lights fade into the distance. In her heart there was something new, something she hadn't felt in years, a promise, unspoken but powerful, that this night was not the end of their story. Ethan, watching her taillights disappear, had no idea just how true that would become. The morning sun cast long golden rays across the quiet street as Ethan unlocked his garage, still sore from the sleepless night before. He expected another slow day of patching up worn-out engines and changing oil for customers who often delayed payment. But as he rolled up the metal shutter, the sound of powerful engines rumbled nearby. Ethan turned, confused, and his eyes widened. A convoy of sleek luxury cars was pulling up in front of his humble shop. Their polished exteriors gleamed under the sunlight, completely out of place in his dusty corner of town. He stood frozen, rag still in hand, as the car doors opened one by one. From the first vehicle stepped Olivia, her expression brighter than he had ever seen it. But it wasn't her presence that left him stunned. A tall, elegant woman in her early 50s emerged gracefully beside her, dressed in a tailored navy suit that seemed to radiate authority. Ethan recognized her instantly, though he had only ever seen her face in newspapers and on television. Olivia Parker, one of the wealthiest and most influential businesswomen in Colorado. She carried herself with quiet confidence, her gaze steady, her presence commanding. Ethan's breath caught as Olivia hurried to her mother's side, her smile full of warmth and pride. The contrast between Olivia's carefree happiness and Catherine's poised demeanor was striking. The townsfolk, who had begun to gather in curiosity, whispered among themselves. What on earth would bring Olivia Parker to the rundown garage of a poor mechanic? Ethan's hands trembled slightly as he wiped them on his rag, uncertain whether to approach or retreat. His chest tightened with nervousness. He wasn't used to attention, let alone the scrutiny of someone so powerful. Catherine stepped forward, her heels clicking softly against the pavement. For a moment, Ethan braced himself for criticism, or perhaps a cold dismissal. But when she finally met his eyes, her expression softened into something he hadn't expected: gratitude. "You didn't just help my daughter last night," she began, her voice calm and measured. "You showed her that real kindness still exists in this world." Ethan blinked, stunned into silence. He wasn't sure what to say, his mouth opening and closing like an engine struggling to start. The sincerity in her eyes left him speechless. Olivia placed a hand gently on her mother's arm, her own gaze fixed on Ethan. "I told her everything," she said softly, "about how you stayed up all night, about how you refused to take money, about how you listened when no one else ever does." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. He glanced between mother and daughter, unable to believe his small act of compassion had reached this far. Catherine nodded slowly, as though confirming her daughter's every word. Then she stepped closer, extending her hand with the grace of someone unaccustomed to being refused. "To a man like you," Catherine continued, "this garage might seem small, but to me it shows something money can't buy. In character, and that's something my company needs." Ethan stared at her, bewildered. I don't understand," he stammered. Catherine's lips curved into a faint smile. "I'm offering you a position, Ethan, head mechanic at Parker. Automotive, with access to tools, technology, and resources you could never dream of here. I want someone who values integrity as much as skill." Her words hit him like a tidal wave. For a moment, he thought he had misheard. The townspeople gasped, murmurs rippling through the crowd as they realized what was unfolding before them. Ethan, the struggling mechanic who had spent years scraping by, was being offered a position in one of the most prestigious automotive companies in the state. He glanced back at his dusty garage, the cracked floor, the shelves of rusting tools he had patched together over the years. This place was his pride, his burden, and his prison. Could he really leave it behind? Could one night of kindness truly open the door to a new life? His heart raced with conflicting emotions. Olivia stepped forward, her eyes shining with quiet encouragement. "You deserve this," she whispered. "You've given so much of yourself for so long without asking for anything in return. Let this be the world finally giving something back to you." Ethan swallowed hard, emotion tightening his throat. For so many years he had worked in silence, unnoticed and unappreciated. To hear such words from Olivia and to see Catherine Parker herself standing before him with a genuine offer felt surreal. He looked down at his calloused hands, the same hands that had held onto hope when everything else slipped away. The decision weighed heavily on him. Accepting would mean leaving behind the garage that represented his struggles, his failures, and his resilience. Yet at the same time, it meant embracing an opportunity to grow, to finally have stability, and perhaps even to make a difference on a larger scale. Ethan lifted his gaze slowly, meeting Catherine's patient expression. "I don't know what to say," he admitted quietly. Catherine gave a small nod. "Say yes," she replied. "Say yes to a future where your skills and your heart can change lives, not just fix engines." The crowd held its breath, waiting. Ethan finally exhaled, the weight on his chest loosening. "All right," he said softly, his voice cracking with emotion. "Yes." A wave of relief and excitement swept over Olivia's face, and Catherine's expression warmed as she clasped his hand firmly. In that handshake, Ethan felt something shift inside him, a new chapter opening. One he had never dared to dream possible. The townsfolk erupted in applause, some cheering, others wiping away tears. For once, Ethan wasn't just the poor mechanic who worked through the night. He was a man whose kindness had brought him into the light. Later, as the convoy of cars prepared to depart, Catherine turned to him one last time. "This is only the beginning," she said with quiet conviction. "We'll be in touch with the details. Until then, know this, you have earned my respect." With that, she and Olivia stepped back into their car. Olivia gave Ethan one last lingering smile through the window, her eyes promising that this connection was far from over. The engines roared to life, and the convoy rolled away, leaving Ethan standing in front of his garage, his heart pounding with hope. As the dust settled, Ethan looked at his small garage one more time. For years it had been his world, his pride and his pain. Now he knew it wasn't the end of his story, but the beginning of something greater. He turned back inside, his steps lighter than they had ever been. For the first time in his life, he saw his struggles not as failures, but as the path that had led him here. A simple act of kindness, a chance meeting at midnight, had rewritten his future. The poor mechanic who once fixed cars in silence had now been given a voice, a place, and a purpose. And deep down, Ethan knew this was only the start.